double dose of optimism, a worldwide symbol of hope during the UK's weekly clap for carers. Not just one, but two rainbows streaking the sky on this May Day. Rush for a remedy. The FDA taking emergency action to authorize a possible treatment. The frantic efforts of researchers desperate to find more drugs that could help. And the over-the-counter drug scientists say could make the virus worse. Tenants versus landlords, moved by some Americans to skip rent today. Navajo Nation, one of the highest rates of COVID infection in the U.S. After years of broken promises and brutal poverty, now a fight for survival. College dreams in jeopardy. On this college decision day, many students are rethinking their college plans in these uncertain times. And the king holds court. LeBron James hosting a graduation ceremony for the class of 2020. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us on this May Day. New month, new beginnings. The hope for many is that with the turn of the calendar page, perhaps the worst is behind us. But in some places, it's still too soon to tell. Now that April 2020 has ended, many stay-at-home orders have also ended. As more than a dozen states open back up, uncertainty looms. Though there is some promising news in the race to find a treatment for COVID-19. Tonight, the FDA announced it has approved remdesivir for emergency use after preliminary results from one study showed the drug shortened recovery time by 31%. But some scientists believe it will take a drug cocktail to treat the virus. The researchers we first told you about back in March who mapped the virus now have their first results. Eva Pilgrim leads us off with what they've found.
The urgent rush to find a remedy. Scientists in labs around the world looking at every option, leaving no possible existing treatment unturned.
There's a ton of people in labs all around the world who want to work with our DNA plasmids.
The best and brightest minds suiting up to work with the live virus. In Southern California, two scientists handling COVID-19 every day.
I mean, I know I can't make any mistake, nothing can be spilled.
Searching for a way to slow it, stop it, and make it go away.
You just try to focus on what you're doing and try to do it as fast as possible to spend the least amount of time in that room.
A lot of scientists are looking for drugs to attack the virus.
The problem with doing that is you often get resistance. The virus can mutate very quickly.
Nevin Krogan at the Quantitative Biosciences Institute is taking a different approach, focusing not on the virus, but on us.
It's trying to understand how the virus comes in and attacks our proteins, and then trying to find drugs or compounds that inhibit those human proteins that the virus needs in order to infect our cells.
Krogan made a roadmap of the virus's attack. He's collaborated with scientists from San Francisco to New York to Paris. They followed the virus to find which of our more than 20,000 proteins it interacts with. They found about 40. Then they made a list of the existing drugs that interact with those proteins. That list, about 60, now narrowed down.
We've uncovered two sets of drugs and compounds that we're very, very excited about.
The first group targets how the body makes the proteins we need. They say they found two promising options, both intended to treat multiple myeloma. One is FDA approved, the other in clinical trial right now. The second group focuses on two protein receptor sites the virus appears to heavily rely on to infect us.
It's really exciting about these receptors because they're very druggable. And there's a number of drugs that are known to bind to these receptors. In the laboratory setting, these all display antiviral activity.
They also say they found something that made them take pause. Dextromethorphan, a common over-the-counter cold med, appeared to help the virus, at least in a lab setting, making it stronger.
It actually increases the virus in the laboratory setting. And of course, dextromethorphan is in the vast majority of cough suppressants that are out there. But again, just to emphasize, more studies are needed. More studies are needed in people to determine if this is actually detrimental.
His findings published in the journal Nature this week. He says he thinks it's likely going to be a cocktail approach, multiple different drugs targeting different aspects that will be the best treatment.
You know, it's a double hit to the virus, and we're very excited about either a couple of our drugs working in combination or combining our drugs with some other drugs like remdesivir. I really think that's going to be potentially the silver bullet in the future.
Krogan and the other scientists he's working with now testing those multiple myeloma drugs in combination with drugs like remdesivir that target the virus. The move by the FDA late today authorizing emergency use of Gilead's remdesivir will pave the way to make it available to hospitalized patients.
We'll be working with the government to determine how best to distribute that within the United States, because there are patients out there that can benefit from this medicine today that are hospitalized, and we don't want any time to waste for that.
They were able to get off the oxygen, get off the ventilators, leave the hospital faster, about 4 days faster compared to the patients. The other half of the patients received placebo. These 4 days are, very important because, 4 days less in a hospital, 4 days less in a mechanical ventilator, 4 days less receiving oxygen are something that really can benefit all our patients.
The lead doctor in the remdesivir clinical trial talking to ABC's Kira Phillips.
Will this lead to other treatments?
It opens the doors. The fact that now we are seeing a medication that has this type of, mechanism to stop the, the viral replication, it gives us the hope that we can actually, find other drugs that can have similar effect or even better effect than remdesivir.
It's an approach that scientists learned from the decades-long fight with HIV/AIDS.
In the case of HIV, what we discovered, we started with AZT back in the 80s. It was a pretty good drug for people who were looking for a bridge to the next wave of drugs, but it wasn't sufficient to do the work. Now we have drugs like integrase inhibitors that suppress the virus much, much more effectively than AZT ever thought about.
Dr. Michael Sag is the director of the Center for AIDS Research at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He has studied AIDS for decades, and he knows all too well what coronavirus can do to the body.
By the morning, I felt good again, and I thought, okay, I'm done with this, only for it to return with a vengeance the next night and the next night and the next night. And that Groundhog Day experience is what makes this virus such a monster, because it teases us to think, okay, we're over it, and then boom, it's right back.
Now recovered from COVID-19, he's rooting for the dozens of efforts worldwide to find a treatment that works.
It just seems like scientists are approaching this from so many different angles of how the virus works, how our bodies work, what the virus needs in our bodies to function.
We've got an all hands on deck. Let's attack this like the Manhattan Project on steroids. And that's kind of what we're doing right now. And I think it's really remarkable how far we've come in such a short period of time. We just can't take our foot off the accelerator. We got to go forward.
We've shown how fast we can move when people work together.
Hopefully this will end up soon and we will look back at this and everything will be worth it.
Eva Pilgrim joins us now from New York. Eva, so how much remdesivir is being made available and who can receive this treatment right now?
Well, Lindsay, Gilead Sciences is donating about 1.5 million vials of the drug to the federal government to be distributed to the patients who are in need. That emergency FDA authorization means that they can give it to patients who are hospitalized in severe condition, Lindsay.
And Eva, until widespread treatment is available, many believe that testing is the key to reopening, but not all tests are created equally. I mean, many antibody tests weren't required to gain FDA approval, and now there are questions about how reliable they are.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of confusion around these antibody testings. There's about 10 of them that have the FDA emergency authorization, and there are hundreds of them out there, many of them being used. Little known fact, you don't actually have to have the emergency authorization to begin testing. And so there's questions about how reliable some of these tests are. The other big question a lot of people have is, what do you do with the information when you get it? There's not clear guidance as to what to do with that information. I was talking to a doctor in Massachusetts today who said the State Department of Health there is telling people that if you haven't had a positive COVID test and you get a positive antibodies test, that you should quarantine. So it's causing some real issues as to what to do next. They're looking for guidance from these federal agencies, but they have not gotten that yet. A lot of people unsure about what to do with those tests, Lindsay.
Yeah, still seeking clarity there. Eva Pilgrim for us in New York. Thanks, Eva. And as parts of the country start to reopen, angry protesters are taking to the streets saying it's not enough. We saw major demonstrations in California, Illinois, and Indiana, along with these shocking images in Michigan. Some protesters fully armed in the state capitol. ABC's Whit Johnson has a closer look.
These are the images that have now been seen across the country. Angry protesters, some of them armed, spilling into the Capitol in Michigan, demanding the country reopen. Today, President Trump tweeting his support for demonstrators, saying the governor of Michigan should give a little and put out the fire. These are very good people, but they are angry. They want their lives back again safely. Today, the governor saying she understands people are feeling restless and want to get back to work, but says she found some of the images she saw disturbing.
Swastikas and Confederate flags, nooses and automatic rifles do not represent who we are as Michiganders.
A flashpoint in this debate over how and when to reopen the country, from Chicago to Indianapolis to California. In Huntington Beach, hundreds of protesters swarming the coast. Officers managing crowds on horseback just 24 hours after California's governor ordered the closure of all beaches in Orange County. But as governors weigh the risks, the Ramirez family in California warning about the dangers of the disease.
I can't stress it enough that people take this serious.
Dad Guillermo dying from COVID-19. 11 other family members getting sick, except for daughter Alexia, who couldn't even get close to her mother to comfort her.
She just sat down and was crying and said, "That's it, your dad's gone. Your dad is gone." And I couldn't even hug her. I just had to watch her cry.
Nationwide, at least 36 states now easing some restrictions by the end of next week. But cases of the virus still rising in at least 18 states. In Texas today, restaurants filling up with customers in Houston, and shopping malls opening too at 25% capacity, just a day after the state saw its deadliest day. In Oklahoma, crowds flocking to malls, some people not wearing face masks. But tonight, a lockdown in Gallup, New Mexico, after a spike in cases, one of the highest infection rates in the country. This motel converted into a respiratory clinic to treat COVID patients. In Michigan, a warning from a doctor on the front lines.
In rural parts of this country, there is no way that we are near a peak. The fact that people think because numbers are low that are reported that we are in the clear, that it's not coming, that is absolutely ridiculous.
As New York State descends from its peak, still around 1,000 new cases per day.
It's a lot better than where we were, for sure, but 1,000 new cases every day is still a very high infection rate. It's still a burden on the hospital system.
Doctors still battling the virus around the clock at Mount Sinai Morningside, treating patients like Warner Vega.
Kind of gasping for air, not able to take deep breaths, and just chest pain every time I did breathe or move.
The 33-year-old father suffering a blood clot.
So you had what's called a pulmonary embolism, a big blood clot that went to the lungs. And we're seeing that even in some healthy young people who have COVID. So you're a pretty tough guy to get through all of that.
And a symbol of sacrifice. 66-year-old Paul Carey, a paramedic from Colorado, who raced to New York to volunteer, died from coronavirus.
So many people came to help, but Paul gave his life for us.
Tonight, that wet market in Wuhan back in the spotlight as the head of the European Union joins calls for a probe into the origin of the virus. Just yesterday, President Trump suggested he's seen evidence to support a theory being pushed by some conservative outlets that the virus originated in a lab in Wuhan. Today, Trump responding to questions about those claims.
We'll be talking to you about it at a later date when we really know some good hard facts. Right. But I've seen probably every version of most of the things you've heard and some of the things you haven't heard.
Yesterday, the U.S. intelligence community acknowledging it's investigating whether the virus was the result of an accident at a lab in Wuhan, but agreeing with scientific consensus that the COVID-19 virus was not man-made or genetically modified. While here in New York, another milestone. Mount Sinai's very first COVID patient finally discharged after 54 days in the hospital.
And Whit Johnson joins us now with more. Whit, tell us about this new report tonight that warns that this pandemic could stretch on for another 2 years.
Lindsay, this report from researchers out of the University of Minnesota says the pandemic could last another 2 years with recurring spikes until roughly 2/3 of the population is immune to the virus. They also say that some of those future spikes could be even worse than we're experiencing right now. Lindsay?
All right, Whit Johnson for us live in New York again. Thanks, Whit. With U.S. unemployment claims topping 30 million, plenty of people across the country are struggling to pay their bills. And today, of course, the first of the month, many who are out of work are unable to make rent. Well, now tenants in cities across the country are organizing and calling on their state and local leaders to cancel rent for the duration of this economic slowdown caused by the coronavirus. ABC's Will Carr has this story.
It's the first of the month, the time when so many start counting their dollars, making sure they have enough to pay rent, including Gabby Nam, who's been cooking professionally for 8 years and recently lost her job at a Brooklyn restaurant.
I'll be able to make rent next month, but after that, if unemployment doesn't kick in, then I'm definitely in trouble.
30 million Americans have filed for unemployment since mid-March, leaving many filled with anxiety, not knowing when they'll get that next check. That's sparking rent strikes across the country, from New York to Minneapolis to here in Los Angeles.
I'm still left with the same choice of either I pay the rent and I'm left without nothing, no money for food or other essential goods.
After losing his job in March, Manuel Antonio Rodriguez joined a socially distant protest in Los Angeles this week, asking the mayor to cancel rent for May.
And so many of us here have had to make that decision, whether we're going to use up the little bit of money that we have on rent or whether we should save it for medicine, for food, and other essential needs right now. So it's not a fight with the landlords, it's a fight with the banks who need to understand that they were bailed out about 10 years ago, and now we need a bailout for the working people.
Others, like Alex Mercier, who also lost his job in March, have teamed up with tenants in their buildings to forego their rent payments together.
There are people that I've been talking to that are sick, that need their medicine, and, trying to force them to pay rent or putting them in a situation where they feel like they need to pay rent over, their medicine is just ridiculous.
But renters aren't the only ones struggling. Landlords have bills to pay too.
I have to rent to anybody, but I want to rent to nice people. So everybody that's in my complex, I adore. I'm still shy of April's rent on some of them. But I understand. I mean, they're usually great.
Daryl Marshak owns a building with 6 tenants in Los Angeles.
Maybe I got 2 months total of my mortgage if I have to come up with it myself. Not to mention water, power, sewage, gardener.
Across the country, there are patchwork policies for housing protection, creating widespread confusion.
We need a uniform national moratorium on evictions and on foreclosures. So the very least that the federal government should do during a pandemic is assure each of us that we won't lose our home during it.
8 states currently have not implemented any statewide orders that would suspend evictions and foreclosures during the pandemic, according to Princeton.
We don't want to create a financial cliff that low-income renters will fall off of once those moratoriums are lifted. So it's also essential that the federal government provide rental assistance. We're urging no less than $100 billion in rental assistance to ensure the housing stability of the country's lowest income renters during this crisis.
For many homeowners under financial stress, the federal rescue package signed in March, known as the CARES Act, allows up to a year to skip or delay mortgage loan payments. According to Black Knight, a data and analytics firm, more than 3.4 million homeowners will do just that, skipping payments for the immediate future. But others, without mortgages backed by the federal government, are left uncovered.
Will Carr joins us now live from Los Angeles. So, Will, what should tenants who can't afford to pay their rent do at this point?
Well, Lindsay, the best thing that anybody can do is actually sit down and talk to their landlord or their lender. These are tough times for everybody. So if you explain your situation, they actually may be willing to work with you to negotiate your rent moving forward. And
what about those renters who are being threatened at this point with eviction?
Well, we're hearing about that across the country. State leaders say they're already dealing with slumlords. People are threatening eviction on their tenants. The best thing you can do is to know your local and your state laws. These are different all across the country, so get online, figure out exactly what the laws are for you, because landlords have been known to tell you one thing, but the law may be the exact opposite. Lindsay.
Some helpful information there, Will Carr. Thanks so much. When we come back, an inside look at the community suffering from one of the highest COVID-19 infection rates per capita in the entire country. Plus, how the pandemic is changing the college equation for countless families, and will it reshape higher education in the future? And how LeBron James is helping the class of 2020 hold the graduation of a lifetime. Stay with us. Welcome back. Tonight we're going inside one community with some of the strictest closures and curfews in the entire country, and here's why. The Navajo Nation has one of the highest rates of infection in the U.S., and sadly, with few resources and little infrastructure, it's one of the least equipped to handle a health crisis like the one we're in right now. Our Matt Gutman reports on the unique challenges the Navajo and many indigenous people now face.
Dr. Sri Shamasunder has been practicing emergency medicine from the back of a car.
How's your breathing?
That's good. But there are limits to what this team can do.
So EMS has just showed up because the gentleman is telling the folks here at COPE and Dr. Sri that he's got shortness of breath, asthma, and they're trying to decide whether or not he needs to be hospitalized at this point. Everybody here is under investigation for COVID.
And COVID-19 is surging through the Navajo community, suffering one of the highest infection rates per capita in the country. The peak weeks away. Dr. Sriram is the co-founder of the HEAL initiative at the University of San Francisco.
I think with the Native population, it is similar to what we've seen vulnerable patients all over the country in terms of whether it's Black or Latinx population in the Bay Area. They are more susceptible, and in New Mexico, the Native Americans only make up 5% of the population, but they make up 20% of the COVID population.
He's teaming up with locals like the COPE program's Nitumagabo Champaign. They're doing rounds at this motel in Gallup, New Mexico, where the unsheltered and the sick can go to get off the street and away from extended families.
So mostly the headaches bothering you? Yeah. No, any blurry vision? No.
Eric Joe, who's a grandfather, talking with us through that broken mask.
Yes, I was worried about my family, but like I told you, I called. They're doing okay.
Okay.
The virus has claimed dozens of Navajo elders and even some of its young. Former Miss Western Navajo, Valentine Blackhorse, was a mother of a 1-year-old daughter. She died this week after testing positive for COVID-19. She was 28 years old. Navajo President Jonathan Nez says his tribe has to rely primarily on itself. It's one reason he's instituted one of the strictest shelter-at-home orders in the country, and during the weekend, curfew.
Flatten that curve, lessen the virus here, and really stop the virus. And the creative way we're doing this is by putting a shelter-in-place order, and we're also putting the curfews, Monday through Friday, 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., weekends, 57-hour curfew.
Historically, the U.S. government hasn't helped much, breaking dozens of promises with Native American tribes. And Congress has approved $8 billion for tribal assistance, but that money has to be split amongst 574 tribes.
Sometimes it goes through the federal agencies before it gets to the tribe, or it goes through the state before it gets to the tribe. We're using that same process, and we have to wait, and we have to submit for these fundings. But the need is now.
It's estimated that about 30% of the people who live on the Navajo reservation do not have access to running water, which is why they use pumps like this. And that makes the constant hand washing necessary during a COVID outbreak that much more difficult. At that pump, we met with Elmer, who was there to get water. During the time of COVID, everybody's worried. You got to wash your hands, clean all the time. When you don't have running water, does it make it that much harder?
Yes, it does. And for little children to wash up daily, to have them clean daily is a problem.
and they love to play outdoors.
Since early March, grassroots groups have worked to provide food and water. The Navajo and Hopi family COVID-19 relief effort raising over $1 million, setting up this makeshift hand-washing station and distributing it around the reservation.
It's just one fix to address the hygiene issue. Don't wait until people are sick, because the conditions that are making people more sick and more at risk are right out on the street.
Navajo Nation is larger than West Virginia, but its population of about 300,000 has access to only about 20 ICU beds on the reservation. The Indian Health Service says they've had to build additional temporary hospital beds to prepare for a modeling prediction of over 200 additional patients a day and over 100 ICU-level patients across the area. In the vastness of the reservation under the shadow of Chimney Butte is where Michelle Tom grew up.
Actually, you can see where I'm from. It's called Chajani-Aha.
Also without running water or power. She's now the only Navajo emergency physician at this urgent care clinic in Winslow, Arizona.
You're getting people pulling up to this parking lot. They had to be intubated here, even though this is not technically an ICU or a hospital, it's an urgent care.
Yes.
And then the only way to save their lives is to get a helicopter here.
Yes.
And then what?
We don't know. We don't have access to them anymore, and that's where the disconnect and that's where the hard part it is for us. Wow. Especially for me, if I know, everyone knows everyone, and I think I hear it more so because I have relatives, and we all know who's not doing so well. And as soon as they leave that chopper, they're no longer in our hands.
She says the closest ICU facility where she can send her patients is at least 1 hour away by chopper or up to 3 hours in an ambulance.
I said I was going to come home after all my medical training and so forth. I essentially am home.
So you wanted to come back here,
yeah.
And Winslow's home, and that's why you feel it's important to be here.
Yes.
Of course, it's no longer a hospital. And growing up, Tom says she never saw a medical professional with a face like her own.
How does that make people feel that they don't get medical consultation, they don't see people like them as their medical providers?
Well, I can only talk from personal experience, right? Sometimes there's a disconnect when language and cultures are not meeting. We know that just by studies and even by experience, you're not going to have the best health care.
That's not from a lack of effort.
I was doing car triage yesterday, and I would say we had about 15 cars. You know, and
that's car triage. You're just going up to the window
by itself. Just me on my shift in the car triage.
Wow.
And that's not counting Little Colorado Medical Center, who is an ER. That's not counting ones that bypass me to go urgent care. Huh. So these are presumptive cases.
And the other issue is that, this is a matriarchal society, and people live in a community, and sometimes it's 6, 7, 10 people living in a house or a household, and people are catching it quickly.
Yeah.
Is that the case?
So that pretty much, along with the healthcare access, right? We also have that multi-generation. We do.
Yeah.
And that's part of our origin studies. That's how we are as a people, that our community comes first. Our people come first. These are our neighbors. These are our relatives. These are our brothers and sisters. So when we're telling them to go home and isolate, they're isolating with a people. And that's even for myself.
She left her family and moved to an apartment an hour away to try to minimize the risk of infecting the group of people she's trying to save.
My job is immensely hard because I have such a connection to my people and to my land. Our elders, our teachers, our protectors, they hold all of the key elements that we need to have a strong sense of identity.
Great insight there from Matt Gutman. Thanks for that. Up next, this never happened. Former Vice President Joe Biden responds to sexual assault allegations. Plus, NBA superstar LeBron James leads a star-studded virtual graduation for the class of 2020. The numbers behind one of the strangest graduations in our lifetime. But first, our tweet of the day. May looks a little different this year. Welcome back. Of course, May is a time when many high school seniors would be looking forward to graduation. But with most commencements canceled, NBA star LeBron James is stepping up to help celebrate the class of 2020. Let's take a look by the numbers. The COVID-19 crisis has thwarted the graduation experience for an estimated 3 million high school seniors. Enter Lakers star LeBron James. His foundation will partner to produce a 1-hour primetime television special May 16th called Graduate Together, America Honors the High School class of 2020. 5 lucky graduating seniors will have a chance to win $5,000 for submitting graduation speeches for the first of its kind national ceremony, which will feature appearances by Malala, Megan Rapinoe, the Jonas Brothers, Pharrell Williams, and many more. The 3-time NBA champ says he wants to honor the class of 2020 and released a statement saying, "Well, this won't be the graduation experience they were supposed to get. We hope we can still give them something special because they deserve it." You likely remember back in 2018, LeBron opened the I Promise School, focusing on at-risk 3rd and 4th graders in his hometown of Akron, Ohio, with plans to expand to 8th grade by 2022. The graduation special will air across all networks and streaming platforms, including right here on ABC News Live. And still ahead, Decision Day. Millions of high school seniors should be choosing a college today, but now many of them are trying to figure out if higher education is even an option. Plus, a bold promise from the new White House press secretary at the first formal press briefing in quite some time. But first, here's some of the trending headlines on abcnews.com.
These are the images that have now been seen across the country. Angry protesters demanding the country reopen, from Chicago to Indianapolis to California.
Take our freedom!
In Huntington Beach, hundreds of protesters swarming the coast. Officers managing crowds on horseback, just 24 hours after California's governor ordered the closure of all beaches in Orange County.
A growing number of states around the country are either beginning to ease restrictions or moving into next phases of reopening businesses. In Texas, dine-in restaurants that want to open are allowed to, starting today, but not all owners are welcoming back customers. Florida will reopen state and local parks next week. Kansas is rolling out plans too.
Today is May Day, or International Labor Day, but it's taking a different shape than it has in years past. Demonstrations continue around the world, including Turkey, Greece, and France.
During her first briefing as White House press secretary today, Kayleigh McEnany was asked whether President Trump will consider using tariffs to punish China over the response to the coronavirus outbreak. It comes as the U.S. intelligence community looks into reports on the origins of the virus in Wuhan. McEnany says China mishandled it.
They slow-walked information on human-to-human transmission alongside the World Health Organization and didn't let U.S. investigators in at a very important time. So we take displeasure with China's actions, but I certainly won't get ahead of the president with those announcements.
High winds in Washington state yesterday turned these tumbleweeds into what looked like a tornado. And a frightening scene in Florida. 2 men were sent flying in whipping winds while working on a suspended platform. The 2 were able to fix their lines and climb down onto a balcony below.
Now to the race for the White House. Presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden breaking his silence after being accused of sexual assault by a former aide from when she worked in his Senate office in 1993. His campaign already denied the accusation, but now Biden himself says in no uncertain terms it never happened. ABC's Mary Bruce has the latest.
Addressing the allegations of sexual assault for the first time publicly, Joe Biden today with an emphatic denial.
Would you please go on the record with the American people? Did you sexually assault Tara Reade?
No, it is not true. I'm saying unequivocally, it never happened. And it didn't. It never happened.
Tara Reade was a staff assistant in Biden's Senate office in 1993 when she says he assaulted her. She's detailed the alleged incident in interviews with ABC News and other outlets, including Democracy Now!
I was up against the wall, and I remember his hands underneath my blouse and underneath my skirt, and his fingers penetrating me as he was trying to kiss me, and I was pulling away.
Reed tells us that at the time she complained to the Senate Personnel Office that Biden had, quote, made her feel uncomfortable. But she says she did not mention an assault, and she has no record of the complaint. She says she shared similar concerns with 3 other staffers in Biden's office. All 3 of those staffers tell ABC News that's not true. Biden prides himself on being an advocate for women's rights and is adamant that women should be heard. Today, he was pressed on why this complaint against him is different.
Women are to be believed given the benefit of the doubt. And there's so many inconsistencies in what has been said in this case. So you just look at the facts. And I assure you, it did not happen.
Biden is now calling for any record of the complaint to be released.
So I'm asking the Secretary of the Senate today to identify whether any such document exists. If it does, make it public.
But he says he will not make public his Senate papers housed at the University of Delaware.
They don't contain any personnel files. They are public records.
Reed's allegations have been heavily promoted by President Trump's campaign. But today, the president seemed to come to Biden's defense.
I guess in a way you could say I'm sticking up for him.
The president, who has been accused by multiple women of sexual assault, including rape, says his rival may be falsely accused.
I would just say to Joe Biden, just go out and fight it.
And we're joined now by Mary Bruce. And Mary, today Biden said women are to be believed and given the benefit of the doubt. Well, how does that square with his handling of this situation?
Well, Lindsay, Biden has been silent for weeks on these alleged allegations. Today was the first time that we have heard him address them publicly, and he has been facing growing pressure, in part from women's rights advocates, to do so, to speak out himself. Now, he has been trying to walk essentially this fine line. On the one hand, he is a longtime advocate for women's rights. He's made very clear that he believes women have to be heard and heard respectfully. But he's also making very clear, adamantly clear, that in this instance, these allegations, he says, simply are not true. Lindsay.
Mary Bruce for us in Washington, D.C. Thanks, Mary. Tonight, a massive new threshold. 3.2 million people have now been diagnosed with coronavirus, but a sign of hope in one of America's hotspots. Cheers today as the very last patient treated at the Javits Center headed home. That temporary hospital is now closed, and Monday, the field hospital set up in Central Park will also shut down. But key FEMA equipment and supplies will stay in New York in case there's a second wave. And the check is in the mail. The federal government has issued more than 120 million stimulus checks to Americans in the last 30 days, but tens of millions are still waiting. The Treasury expects to send about 170 million payments in total. California is, quote, days, not weeks away from changes to stay-at-home orders there. Governor Newsom said today he's very close to making changes that would affect retail and restaurants, but he cautioned the state could lose ground in its fight against COVID if people do not social distance, citing packed beaches last weekend. Well, one measure that the country is getting back to business, the number of people taking to the air. This past month has seen a dramatic decline in the number of passenger flights, but it's beginning to tick up, and the airlines are taking steps to make flying safer for passengers and crew. ABC's Gio Benitez has those details.
Starting Monday, if you're planning to fly, chances are you'll have to wear a mask. Southwest tonight joining American, United, Delta, and JetBlue, requiring them for all passengers in the next 2 weeks. Some airlines also blocking some or all middle seats. A study finding those seated near a sick passenger are most at risk, with an 80 to 100% chance of infection, but that the rest of the plane has a less than 1% chance of picking up those germs. The number of people flying in the U.S. is down 93% from last year, but the numbers are slowly increasing.
Travel is not going to get easier. It's going to get harder.
And the new normal could include on-site testing. Emirates has become the first airline in the world to conduct a rapid COVID-19 test for passengers in Dubai. It's a blood test that reportedly returns results in 10 minutes.
Our thanks to Gio for that. And we turn now to College Decision Day and how this pandemic has changed the equation for families across America. The virus eroding the college dreams for many. And some young people are now turning to Plan B. What will higher education look like on the other side of this pandemic? ABC's Terry Moran has that story.
It's Decision Day for Clara Ocampo.
Ocampo, O-C-A-M-P-O.
Clara's a high school senior in Wheeling, Illinois, outside of Chicago, and she's heading to college, community college.
I want a little small college that I can stay home and, go back and forth and I'm happy.
Clara wants to work in the healthcare field as a phlebotomist trained to draw blood from patients. She says she's optimistic by nature and sees the pandemic as a kind of inspiration.
I already knew I wanted to do it from the beginning, and I already applied way before this whole coronavirus started. It has made me want to do it more and get certified more so I could go out there and help.
Clara's choice is one story. Across the country, the math is changing dramatically for the hundreds of thousands of high schoolers who are deciding on their next steps in the shadow of the coronavirus.
So will higher education change? You bet. We believe that the number of college students enrolled this fall will decline by 15 to 20% nationwide.
College was always a logical, even socially mandated choice for so many of them. But now, as families struggle with job losses and pay cuts, and the massive debt loads that many American college grads carry for years loom ever larger, an old question has a sharper edge. Is college worth it?
It feels very unlikely that I'll be going to a four-year college.
Chris Teresi considered going to Roosevelt University in Chicago. He was looking at broadcasting, but then the virus hit and his perspective shifted.
I was teetering in the middle at that point, and this kind of just put a damper in it, at least for the near future. You know, again, the school that I had been accepted to, $40,000 a year, nothing to sneeze at.
It's a lot of money, and most American students go into debt to pay for college. 69% of college students of the class of 2019 took out student loans, and they graduated with an average debt of $29,900. The hope, the gamble, is that college pays in the long run. According to the College Board, the median earnings of Americans who graduate from college with a bachelor's degree are almost $25,000 higher than those of high school graduates. But for some, like Chris, the future is too uncertain right now.
So today is decision day, right, for a lot of people your age in America. How is that going? What decision are you making going forward for yourself?
I'm fortunate enough to have my job, and in the off chance that I go to college, I don't want to risk not having that job, at least for right now, because it just seems like, you know, I'm lucky to have it while I do.
Chris works at Walgreens. He's a frontline essential worker in the pandemic. Not long ago, people in those jobs were called unskilled or low-skilled workers. We're looking at things, and we're looking at people differently now. Chris isn't sure, even if he chose college and paid the money, he'd even be on campus.
It doesn't seem like for a long time there's going to be an environment even to go to school. You know, if we want to have to start out school online in the first place, it doesn't feel like it's going to be worth it, at least right now.
All these questions are very real, but the draw of a college education is still very powerful.
We're asking them to be grown-ups very, very quickly and make an important decision. We need them to go to college. They are our hope for the future, and we need them to be the next set of economists and scientists who are going to solve the next great crisis that comes our way, and that is certainly going to happen someday.
But the four-year route isn't for everyone. Kira Young is a cosmetology student, and her focus when this pandemic ends may sound simpler, but it's still important.
More than anything, I think it's going to be an honor to just be able to give life back, you know, and be able to give people the confidence and the self-esteem that they've lost. People are going through a time of basically mourning and grieving.
Terry Moran, ABC News, Washington.
So many with a serious dilemma. Our thanks to Terry Moran for that report. And speaking of graduation, with ceremonies on hold, one school principal made sure each senior got a special and personal celebration. A royal delivery for some lucky Brits tonight. Princess Charlotte, who turns 5 tomorrow, dropped off homemade pasta to those in need. Kensington Palace says the entire royal family helped make and deliver the meals. And in North Carolina, Principal Tabari Wallace of West Craven High School donned his full graduation regalia to surprise seniors with a personal parade of teachers, police officers, and firefighters, and brought yard signs celebrating their upcoming commencement. Wallace says it's the least they can do to show seniors they care, especially in light of the delayed graduation and prom, which he says will happen eventually. Our thanks to our friends at ednc.org for sharing that story with us. And that is our show for this hour, but keep it here on ABC News Live. Coming up next, the star-studded Call to Unite, the 24-hour live stream featuring Oprah, Julia Roberts, and many more supporting COVID-19 relief efforts. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Good night, and have a great weekend.